This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston, bringing you stories of capitalism. This week, David Gura takes us through the state of the world as investors look forward to the new year. And we learn how generative AI could be used to give us healthy snacks that are just as tasty as the unhealthy kind. But we begin with a story about tenure. Not the kind that guarantees you a job, but the kind that you have to earn day after day and year after year. The kind that, looking back after 15 years, may look obvious, but that at the beginning was anything but.
You know, I never really thought about, I knew I had to be here a substantial time to work with the team and drive the company what it could be, and that's great. But it never was like to do this job 5 years. I think the time has to be where you have the place from where we were in a place that's great condition.
When Brian Moynihan took over as CEO of Bank of America on January 1st, 2010, the place was definitely not in great condition. It had just gone through a series of mergers, including the one that brought Moynihan to the bank through its acquisition of Fleet Boston just 6 years before.
Before Fleet Boston deal, Legacy Bank of America at that point probably had 100,000 employees. Fleet Boston had 50, 60,000. You know, then Merrill had 60,000, let's say I had 15,000, 20,000, Countrywide had 40, 50. More people came from the outside and not. And so one of the things that the team and I had to settle down is what is the culture we want, what are the values?
Forming a single culture from such disparate parts would have been a challenge all by itself. But this all happened as the great financial crisis was in full bloom, putting enormous pressure on all the big banks. A year into his tenure, Moynihan faced a mountain of losses from the subprime mortgage business he had inherited when his predecessor, Ken Lewis, purchased Countrywide, leading to losses of over $30 billion. Its stock price had fallen nearly 10%. Its price-to-book value was down to 0.45. And the government was putting into place fundamental changes in the banking system overall, including upping the capital requirements for the banks. Requirements some doubted Bank of America could meet.
You have a lot ahead of you. You also have a lot behind you. And we think about what the banking world was, what Bank of America was in 2008, 2009, 2010 when you took the job. It was a different world.
Well, so a lot of people don't remember that in 2007 and 2006 is actually when the financial crisis started to come through. The property values started going down, the overlending and the consumer side became exposed, the ripple effect through some of the CDOs and things like that, the impact on the Bear Stearns and Lehman and Merrill and other companies and the acquisitions that took place in 2008. What you had was non-banks that weren't governed by any rules, that were all brought in the banking system, and the net was thrown over, the tent was thrown over a lot bigger group. That's what made it different coming out the other side, because suddenly, you know, the group of my peers were Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP, Citi, ourselves, et cetera. It wasn't just the banks and then, you know, the securities firms over here or the insurance firms over here. And that then required all the rules to change fast and all the reach to change fast and stuff people hadn't thought about. You know, the Volcker Amendment and, you know, this stuff, stuff that people hadn't thought about. And that was because suddenly you took all these people who were governed by different regimes, different rules, threw them in a pot and said, we're going to put a tent over all.
Moynihan's management team at the time knew that the challenges could make or break his new leadership. Ann Finucane served as Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Bank of America in 2011 before becoming the Vice Chair of the bank and Chair of its European operations.
This was a moment, if you will, in financial services. We were in a near recession that was the likes of we had never seen before, and B of A had a million problems. And we had issues with regulators, we had issues with analysts, we had issues with clients and customers, elected officials were questioning our viability, and you know, the stock price was very low and there were questions about the company in general. And this is what Brian Moynihan stepped into. And he stepped into it, I have to say, eyes wide open, because he had done almost every executive job in the company. So he was prepared. I think he was prepared in a way almost no one else could have been. And he was also willing, and he was certainly able. So this was a moment for this company, and he assembled a crew around him, an executive management team, and we were going to work 24/7 for what turned out to be at least a few years. and we recovered.
To bring his bank back from the brink, Moynihan focused on what was working, where it could win, and what it could do without, cutting billions in expenses and tens of thousands of jobs.
We got rid of $300 billion of assets, 50 operating businesses. We were down to operating efficiency, made sense. And we said, now we got to grow. And so the first part of responsible was grow, no excuses. But what you had in the base of that was these 8 lines of business we talk about. You have Jack Welch or somebody would say, you got to be top 1, 2, 3 in the business. We were top 1, 2, 3 in all the businesses across the 8 lines of business. But what we had is a lot of other stuff that was not as interesting. And then we had the regulatory issues, and then we had the mortgage issues. So we had to just push all that away. But all those acquisitions left us with a franchise that is a top consumer banking franchise, the top wealth management franchise, the top commercial banker in the United States, a global large corporate banker, and a global markets business that we were able then to start to invest in growing them organically.
We had to decide what we were going to do in terms of everything from customer care, if you will, employee morale, dealing with elected officials, dealing with regulators, and then what businesses we were going to lean in on, and those that we were going to perhaps exit. So Brian is got a bit of the engineer in him, in that he is an exacting person. We laid out every line of business. We laid out every geography we were in. When you look back on it, you can be a bit nostalgic, but at the moment, it was very difficult. And he was so determined. He's a very good leader because he's calm, and he's thorough, and he's also human. And what I mean by that is he got when everybody was kind of frazzled, and we just kept at it. But there was a camaraderie around it that I think would be maybe unexpected.
Even as Moynihan and his team were rebuilding Bank of America from the ground up, concerns about the bank led others to make sure its problems didn't further risk the entire financial system, leading the government to insist Bank of America and the other money center banks take large infusions of cash investments, and even for mega investor Warren Buffett to pitch in with a $5 billion investment.
So in 2011, August, when the United States had been downgraded, was close to defaulting. At that point, the U.S. was short and didn't have enough money and was starting to run out of money. We were also getting knocked around at the same time. And he came in August and said, here's $5 billion. I know you don't need it, but it'll stabilize. And the 250,000 plus people we had at that time came to work the next day and said the smartest investor put $5 billion on a company in 24 hours.
That was an interesting moment. At that point, we had actually recovered enough that we had sufficient capital. And by the way, he knew that. And in fact, that's what he said to Brian. I know it, that's why I'm investing. It helped us enormously with the analyst community and elected officials and even our own employees. If Warren Buffett was investing in us, it was such a boost of confidence that we didn't maybe otherwise have at the point. So it was reputationally really beneficial.
Under Moynihan, Bank of America has not only survived, it has thrived, earning over $15 billion a year over each of the last 10 years, increasing its assets from $2.3 to $3.3 trillion, and its share price from $13 to $44. And that price-to-book ratio? It's gone from 0.45 to over 1.25. But even as it has come back strong, it has not grown as fast as its biggest rival, J.P. Morgan, whose share price has led the pack of the big banks, while Bank of America remains somewhere in the middle. Some have suggested that Moynihan's steadfast commitment to responsible growth may have held it back.
Did you leave any money on the table because of the responsible part? And does responsible growth look the same today in 2025 as it did in 2010?
So one of the things we always talk to our teammates about is responsible growth was a call to growth, not a call to be responsible. We were already pretty responsible, think from 10 to 15. And the idea was we'd done all the work, we reshaped the company, we said, now we got to grow. And so that you never disrupt the company's ability to keep going. And we have businesses which offset each other. So the markets business has done well, and the interest rate environment changed. Now the consumer and global banking business will kick in. But the idea of responsible growth is that you got to grow, no excuses. You got to win in the marketplace.
Responsible growth is like a dual thought, if you will. Demonstrating responsibility, which is sort of an extension of good governance, and also the contract you make with your clients and your employees, that you're going to be responsible to them first and foremost all along the way. And remember now where we came from. And then the second thing was that we would grow. So responsible growth can be a modifier to growth, but it's actually two thoughts. We will be responsible in all the ways that clients and regulators and the community would want you to be, and we will grow, maybe more conservatively than others, but I just repeat again, B of A has had 10 years of 15 billion plus net income consistently.
Where is Bank of America today? Give us a sense of how you grade yourself.
Well, we have great potential, but there's a phrase that Jim Collins, a great business writer, uses, and what I say. So when I got a lot of people asking me, I just had our market presidents on, and what about 15 years? What are you proud of? What do you do? I said, it's a nice start. What this company has ahead of us is a lot because of what we've done for the last 200 years, but what we've done in the last 15 years as a team.
As you look forward to the next 15 years, what do you think that may hold for Bank of America, and what kind of person would need to lead it going forward as opposed to what's led in the past?
I think if you look ahead, the changes that will come from the data, the technology, the ability to transmit that data, the compute power, the ability to imitate a human's thinking, those are ahead of us. That implication of voice recognition, computational power, algorithmic analysis, mathematical analysis, combined with an understanding how humans can drive it, makes the next 15 years a whole nother sea change in how we operate. And a person that will be operating that has to be that wise and that current, that balanced and that aggressive. And that's the key, which is how do you push?
As Moynihan positions Bank of America for the next 15 years, one of his priorities is to ensure that it is both a global bank and a local one, that it is thoroughly integrated into the communities it serves.
The whole idea was that we would set up a situation where you'd have top-line executives, but you'd also have market presidents. And the idea behind that was that market president would have a beat on that community, that economy, how we were going to contribute to it, and by the way, how we were going to get our fair share of business from that community. So he's been very focused, and he takes it all the way down to the community level to make sure that not only is the reputation good, but the numbers are good.
And that's where we turn next on Wall Street Week, to one of those communities Moynihan works to serve, and a market president who illustrates what responsible growth means in practice. During his 15 years at the helm of Bank of America, Brian Moynihan has nurtured an alternative structure within the bank, one focused not just on its 8 lines of business around the globe, but also on the individual communities it serves across the United States. That alternative structure is built around 97 regional presidents who add to their regular banking jobs specific local responsibilities.
It's all about serving the client. And when you think about Brian's tenure and his 15 years, he worked hard to build the culture of Bank of America. He wanted to simplify this organization. He helped us focus and have everything center around the financial lives of our clients. So it sounds like common sense, but when you're an institution of our size with 8 lines of business, that takes a lot of coordination, and it takes that local understanding of the communities.
Jennifer Chandler is the Dallas market president, charged with focusing on her region in addition to her job as head of B of A's Philanthropic Solutions team.
One of the things that we started, this is like 30 years ago, we started thinking about this question, which is if we bought companies and pulled the corporate headquarters out of town, we pulled out the senior leadership too, because the company became a subsidiary and a part of a whole. And that became acute in the 80s when the acquisition started building up into the 90s. And so after that, we said, how do we think about having our cake and eat it? How can we have these national businesses, which are run nationally, not locally in the disparate parts, but run nationally, a wealth management business and a consumer banking business and a middle market business? How do we knit them together? And so we started this idea of building the same kind of cooperation in the markets with a leader, a market president, who would replicate me in that market and replicate what used to be.
They've had market president for my full tenure here, as long as I can remember, at least in the 25 years. But I have seen it really improve under the leadership of Brian Moynihan. And as you know, he celebrated his 15-year anniversary as our CEO. So early on in my career, it was more around the giving in the community, a check presentation, maybe some volunteerism. But under his leadership, it was far more about delivering this exceptional experience to our clients, to take this massive institution, to make it feel more local. He was very thoughtful in that around who we had in those positions. It's quite the honor.
The regional president system is B of A's way to have the best of both worlds. All the capacity of a big money center bank, together with the local connections of a regional bank.
How do you compete with regional banks? Because often regional banks would say that's exactly what they do. They're located there, they know, they have all those client relations, personal relations with the society, with the culture. How do you compete with that?
So the way we think about it is we got out local to locals and out national to national. So our team in the local market has the authorities to do things, credits up to $30, $40 billion, all approved locally, no other approvers, or even higher than that in some cases. So the idea that's competitive locally. So we think about what the power of that team has that's managing locally, the personnel they have, and then how they work together. And that's where in the market president, through the 97 teammates we have that do this, they have scorecards to make sure the business is moving. Those line up with our line of business scorecards. And so the idea is to give them authority and power, and then advertising and charity money, all that they replicate the president of a bank. And that's what they do.
You mentioned 97. How do you pick 97? Why isn't it 80 or 120? How do you pick where you need a regional president?
Oh, we put it wherever we have a business. So we actually are in probably another 30 or 40 markets that are small, that aren't as distinct. So we look at the MSAs, and we said our goal in the company is to cover the entire population. By historical accident, for example, we didn't have anybody in Ohio, so we'd now built out Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati, Dayton a little bit. We didn't have Louisville, Kentucky, just because there was never a bank required. So we're building all these places, but it's all MSAs.
As Dallas market president, Chandler competes against regional banks, but she also works with them.
They all play an important role, and I love our regional banks. I'm dear friends with many of the CEOs around town, and it takes all of us, and I think they would tell you that. It starts with understanding our clients. That is very localized, everything we do. So while we have 14,000 teammates and a very large presence here, every week I'm in a financial center, whether it's in the center of downtown or it's in a suburb, and I'm there as the doors open. And I will tell you, the person that our clients are walking in to see are people from the community there. So when you think about regional banks knowing their communities, when I can tell you I had a receptionist that just celebrated 57 years, I think that would reassure you that those clients know exactly who they're going to walk in and see. And those stories are not small. Our folks stay here, and whether it's fiduciary planning on the private wealth side, we helped write the fiduciary documents with the estate planner. I wouldn't say one absolutely has that secured better than another. We think the regionals are very important for a lot of reasons, but I firmly believe with the approach we take and the approach at Bank of America, we understand our communities and we have very strong relationships with the clients we serve.
Dallas became a financial hub in the 1930s after the discovery of oil in East Texas, and went on to become a manufacturing center during World War II. With the tech boom of the 1990s, it has become part of what some people call the Silicon Prairie, supporting a diverse group of industries, including financial services. Schwab announced that it was moving to Dallas from San Francisco in 2019. All of this has meant steady growth for the Dallas area, with a current population of nearly 8.5 million people, up from around 5 million in 2010 when Moynihan became CEO.
It is an exciting time, and I'm third generation Dallasite, and so I've seen just the history of this community. And we've always been a can-do city when you think about what we've done, and we were very forward-thinking many years ago, whether it was the railroad, DFW airport. So we continue to think for the future and see what the needs of the community are. Why I raise that is that's what's worked to bring this diverse economy to North Texas. So examples include technology. Well, Texas Instruments was here many years ago. So when we think about technology, that was for us the 60s, the 70s. So always being forward thinking. Now that looks like biotech. Many people don't think of Dallas necessarily as a technology hub. They think of some other city here in Texas. Well, that's Dallas, and we're attracting the talent from the East Coast, from the West Coast. They're coming here. So it's diversity in every industry. Technology is a large one. We also see a large presence of global companies who either bring their headquarters here or they want to buy shore, maybe have population here or overseas. And I attribute that to, again, the great climate we have. We're centrally located. We're favorable when it relates to taxes. And it runs the gamut, manufacturing. One that you may or may not think of is the sports industry. We are number one when it relates to sports, and it's not just the usual suspects. We, of course, are the official bank of the Dallas Cowboys.
How do you know that it's working? Or maybe more important, how do you know when it's not working?
We keep track of all the things that happen. There's metrics for every market, and we go through them constantly, and they've been building on, building on, and building on. But how I really know it works is when I go into market and watch that team tell me about what they've been doing together, whether it's on the volunteer side, whether it's on the business referral side. And so they are always telling me that. And I don't rely on just what our statistics say. I rely on them also feeling good about it. And what can we do? So when a natural disaster comes up, Western North Carolina, the market president there, the Augusta, Georgia, the Florida, they also are the people help us deploy in those markets. And sometimes it's the people working branches and commercial bank. Sometimes it's big operations center. So, and they basically lead our efforts in our forum to help bring those employees. And so what you see is the success around all that. It's not just business referrals and that stuff. It actually gets into them leading the market and also helping us do what we do. So when the horrible floods came in Western North Carolina, we found every teammate. We brought our Star Lake branch up. We brought our ATMs up. We brought food in and water. We brought water to house. But we're working through that market presence, say, what do you need? And then in Augusta, Georgia, the same thing with Oro Parish, or down in Florida with the various markets. What do you need? And what are you hearing? How do we connect through you so that we can not only have these national relief teams that are tremendous, that are monitoring this and doing, but they do it through the eyes of the local and how we can help them.
Chandler credits CEO Moynihan's leadership with avoiding the recent upheaval in regional banking in the wake of Silicon Valley Bank's collapse.
If we think about commercial real estate and we think about that example, it goes back to if we had not had responsible growth, not 6 months before, not a year before, if we hadn't driven that for a decade before, would we have had far more challenges? Absolutely. But it wasn't only the commercial book, and if you look at our balance sheet, we're responsible in our lending and we had smaller exposure. It was on the deposit side of the balance sheet. If you look at the regionals and some of the others that had challenges, we weren't concentrated on the deposit side either. So it goes to client selection, making thoughtful decisions. But I'll tell you, in hindsight, thinking back a few years before, were there a few deals and opportunities we may have looked at that wanted to do at the time that looked attractive? Of course there were. But how did we feel going through that experience when we could not only insure our clients, but we were able to step up and help some of those other institutions that needed us at that time?
So it takes some care and feeding that is important. I talk to the team. I just talked to them today. I talk to them every month to make sure they give me any input of what we can do. And then we advertise locally and we use their presence locally so their names appear in all the press, and so that when somebody says, I got a problem with Bank of America, I got an opportunity for Bank of America, they know who to go to.
As Brian Moynihan looks forward to the next chapter for Bank of America, he emphasizes the history of the bank, its tradition of connections to the communities it serves, and above all, its connection to its clients and customers, driven by a team that's learned to pull together.
Great businesses that have a common purpose to be great for the clients of those businesses, each other, the shareholders, and the communities they serve, and doing it in a way that, frankly, we're very proud of. Our customer delight scores are as high as they've ever been. Our teammate scores, our attrition's down. That's all good stuff, but it comes down to serving those customer and clients every day. And all that's worked to where we have driven this company, from here to some places kind of fun. And the next generation after I'm gone will take it and drive it even further.
Coming up, having your cake and eating it too, literally. The promise of AI for healthy snack foods that taste just as good as the other kind. That's next on Wall Street Week. This is a story about having it all. Our favorite snack food, our trim figure, our healthy body, and the health of the planet as well. All thanks to the wonders of generative AI, or at least that's the plan. Why does the world need another snack food? There are a lot of them out there.
The world needs another snack food because the world needs a healthy snack food. They need a lot of healthy snack foods.
Harold Schmitz spent decades at Mars, the company responsible for some of the most popular snacks in the world. He is now a founding partner of the venture capital firm The March Group, targeting the $700 billion global snack market, putting artificial intelligence at the center of snack food companies like rivals.
What does artificial intelligence add to the recipe?
What AI does is it actually makes this incredibly complex mixture of chemistry, biochemistry that then goes through food processing. It actually makes it understandable. So product development can happen exponentially faster in order to create exponentially better products that are more cost-effective for consumers in the marketplace.
If Schmitz succeeds in making healthier snacks, it couldn't come at a better time. Studies show people continue to eat more snack food, even as they struggle with weight gains that affect their health.
Consumers, for whatever reason, have less time for traditional meals as we think about them. And so snack foods play a really important role in filling these, dietary occasions.
At the same time, obesity is increasing at alarming rates. Are those two things connected?
So it is quite possible they are connected. What we certainly know is that obesity is high, and it has been increasing. And diabetes, type 2 diabetes specifically, it's been called a global epidemic, is high, and it has been increasing. It is really, really interesting that for the first time in history, thanks to the pharmaceutical industry, we actually see hints that this curve is bending downwards.
JP Morgan predicts that by 2030, 9% of the U.S. population, 30 million Americans, will be on GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy.
When you talk about the GLP-1s, Wegovy or Ozempic, those sort of things we know about, they do affect the demand, do they not? And that sounds like it wouldn't be good for somebody in the snack food business. If people are eating less snacks, that's not good.
Now, for the first time in human history, we actually have a class of pharmaceuticals that's relatively safe, and it causes a decrease in food consumption. So in terms of demand, consumer demand will go down for certain types of foods that are less healthy, but consumer demand is going to go up for foods that are more healthy. And frankly, it's pretty clear from a business context that there's a gap in the marketplace for these healthy foods.
Seeking healthy foods to fill this gap in the marketplace became a quest for UC Davis computer science professor Ilias Takopoulos. Not because it was his job, but because of his experience with his son, who had to drop out of school due to a debilitating condition. Doctors had no answers, so he looked at the food his son was eating.
We consulted with different nutritionists, we designed a diet, and within 9 days my son was cured. And he's now 15, he never had this issue again. And said, okay, I'm sold, that's it. Everything we do in PIPA is all about food.
Takopoulos' company, PIPA, targets uses of AI for food, working with a range of companies from the largest consumer packaged goods companies to startups like Rivals, where the focus is on fiber and protein over savory snacks full of sugar, fat, and starch.
Food is something that's underserved in terms of AI. We are at the precipice of something really big. We have a need to change the paradigm, and we have to be more sustainable. Going to our health, and for a healthy society, we need to generate a food that can keep us healthy in the long term.
Does the food industry, particularly some of the large food companies, because they're very big, do they know they're on the brink of something really big?
They do. They have realized that, hey, you know what? Maybe there's a reckoning that's coming.
If I am a food company and I want to develop a new food, what does AI allow me to do that otherwise I could not do?
Yeah, excellent question. So what AI does is figuring out where you should focus. So imagine having all these variables, all these parameters. I mean, where do you start and what do you explore? Based on the velocity you have of your experiments, your formulations, or doing a tasting, right? So what the AI can do is quickly and dirtily, of course, make you focus on what matters.
In the pursuit of the food industry's holy trinity, affordability, scalability, and taste, sorting through the billions of possible ingredient combinations and process parameters is hard enough without worrying about nutrition. let alone sustainability. But Rivals must also hit the mark on that familiar, satisfying crunch.
You can see that we got good filling in the center. You got real nice cell structure so that the texture is delicate.
Like Harold Schmitz, Ralph Jerome spent decades at the Mars Company, including as head of its chocolate research and development arm. He's a co-founder of Rivals, and he showed us the business end of applying AI to food processing, all based around a machine called an extruder.
This machine will knead, it will mix, it will hydrate, it will cook, it will cool, it will form, it will shape. The problem with it is that a lot of times it's more art than science.
It's been around since the 1930s, a technology used in some 50% of food products on grocery store shelves today.
So typically in the industry, extruders have been run with high starch components because it works. You know, you use starch and you get to the end of the barrel and you get this beautiful expanded puff or chip or whatever the high carbohydrate food du jour is.
It turns out that Rivals' objective, to shift away from snacks that are full of fat, unhealthy starches and sugars to healthier ingredients, is hard to do.
So the challenge is, can you extrude high protein and high fiber and get those textural characteristics? And by textural characteristics, I mean the aeration, the delicate texture, so that when you bite on it, you get nice crunch, so that when you bite in it, it's not a hard rock. And that's what the aeration does. Starch out of an extruder does that brilliantly, whereas protein and fiber do not. Product is moving further and further down.
Jerome claims Rivals would have had to conduct 500,000 experiments to develop its first products. So it turned to AI to cut that number to only 71, coming up with its Rad Ranch, Tasty Taco, and Late Night Pizza flavors. With the data they've been collecting to train their algorithms, Jerome and the Rivals AI engine produce affordable, nutritious snacks.
If you have the right data to train it, it will be able to figure out any complex relationship. So what you're seeing here is it's running a simulation with some parameters. And what the AI is doing here is actually it's going to optimize. It will take a minute or two. And it will run many, many simulations. And it will say, okay, maybe you want to change the dye or you want to change the temperature. It gives actually some new parameters, new values for the parameters for you to test in the lab. So instead of you trying to figure out, okay, what should I do? What's my next experiment? It actually does this for you by running like thousands to millions of simulations in a matter of minutes.
Rivals was created to apply AI technology to the manufacture of snack foods, but it's far from the only food company, big or small, that is pursuing the possibilities, as Alex Frederick of PitchBook told us.
From what I have seen, food companies are taking quite a drastic approach to apply AI throughout their food production, from concept development, consumer research, R&D, and helping to scale food production. Unilever, Kraft Heinz, PepsiCo, and AB InBev are a number of examples of big companies who are all heavily investing in and deploying AI models.
The leading international food companies have big advantages in size and scale, in access to capital, and the amount of proprietary data that they can use. But Schmitz thinks smaller startups like Rivals also have some things going for them.
The beauty of Rivals with the AI component is the AI actually enables Rivals to radically reduce its R&D costs, its consumer insight generation costs, and a whole host of other costs that in traditional food companies that aren't using AI at the center, they have to put a lot of money into supporting those operations in a way that Rivals actually can now put a lot less, exponentially less.
The road to better, healthier food is littered with new inventions that have been overhyped or have fallen by the wayside over the years. Most recently, food tech investors and VCs lost billions of dollars on a promise that technology could be used to replace animals with plants and cultivated cells.
So these companies that we're talking about in terms of the plant-based and cell-cultured meat, those companies, the taste was subpar. The nutrition, in many cases, is subpar. The affordability is subpar. The scalability, the ability to manufacture for millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people is subpar. And it actually turns out that the environmental sustainability aspects are sometimes subpar as well. So it's a miss on all of these key points that actually a successful company in the food space needs to deliver on.
There's a long list of technology failures in food. One good example was Olestra. Anyone who was around and snacking on foods in the 90s is likely familiar with Olestra. This was a fat replacement product that was used in chips and other snack foods, and it was found to cause significant gastro distress and was fairly quickly pulled off the market.
But Rival's chief marketing officer, Erica Patney, who was the marketing force behind the Kind Healthy Snacks brand, says that Rivals is off to a strong start with its launch on the West Coast.
So we're going to be about 3x what we were last year, this year in terms of sales. Our repeat rate tells us that we're growing our velocity, which is one of the key metrics at retail. So we are now in about 2,000 stores.
Do you market the AI piece? Because AI is so much in the zeitgeist right now. Many people will try it just because it's AI generated.
So to consumers, we do not. And our belief is that the consumer, one, doesn't really need to know how is it made in terms of what equipment is used and what technology goes into, R&D and innovation. What they really care about is how does it taste, what does it do for me, and what does it cost?
This is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity, Rivals is, and it's a profitable multi-billion-dollar opportunity that can be profitable in the context of what the tech VC world in Silicon Valley would sort of traditionally think of. I think one way to be really successful in the consumer products industry and food is to realize two things. People want to live forever, and they want to feel great while they're living forever.
Coming up, David Gura is here for a look forward to what 2025 has to offer to investors and to the world. That's next on Wall Street Week.
This is a story about the intersection of geopolitical risks and the global economy. Every year, Eurasia Group publishes a report forecasting the biggest risks the world is likely to face. Cliff Kupchan, chairman of Eurasia Group, says that the world is entering a time of danger that is on par with the 1930s and the early Cold War.
G0 means lack of a group of countries that can impose or run an international order. The main reason that it is reached a crescendo this year is the victory of Donald Trump. He cements and sort of makes permanent, much more permanent, the victory of the G0. It was a long-term trend. I mean, retrenchment is a fact of American life. It's been around since Trump won. But now we have a Donald Trump that's much stronger than he was last time, is not going to support U.S. alliances and the U.S. role in the world. If the U.S. doesn't lead, there's no alternative. I mean, China is the other great power. China probably doesn't want to lead, from what I can tell. It's not ready to lead.
You mentioned China. That's another risk, the relationship between the U.S. and China, and you can forecast a decoupling of that relationship. Do you see that as a return to the way things were during the first Trump term, or does that look different under the second one?
It looks similar but worse, and that's a real problem. We call it unmanaged decoupling or breakdown. The main trigger of it is going to be the Trump tariffs, which are going to be like a slap in the face to the Chinese. I think it's going to be big numbers he'll come out with, 50 to 60% top rate, maybe a 25% average rate, but they're going to be big numbers. The supply chains, hit to global growth, and more structural suspicion between the two sides, which is kind of the last thing we need, because it makes inadvertent escalation that much more likely.
Markets have been so focused on artificial intelligence for several years now. It's something that Eurasia Group has warned about as a risk in years past.
Well, a boon and a risk.
Yes.
But a mixed bag.
Here you're writing about AI Unbound.
Right.
There is a group of President-elect supporters who are enthusiastic about not having the kind of regulatory hurdles that have been in place during this administration. Yeah. What are the consequences, potential consequences of not having them in place when it comes to the development of AI?
What we're going to see this year is less attempt at regulation while AI continues its relentless march forward to become more and more powerful. We do have Trump and his friends from Silicon Valley, especially Elon Musk, who are strong supporters of this, and that'll be one of the jet skis that AI is going to be on this year.
Dovetail that with what we were talking about a few minutes ago, that is the U.S.'s relationship with China, and how does that binary play out in the world of AI? The race continues between these two countries when it comes to developing and improving this technology.
Probably the greatest risk from lack of regulation is the U.S.-China relationship. They share a common interest in trying to prevent autonomous weapons, in trying to prevent the intersection of AI and military activity. But as the relationship gets worse, even this nascent AI working group which the two are sharing this year is likely to disappear.
Risks to the global economy are growing, along with geopolitical threats. Morgan Stanley's chief global economist, Seth Carpenter, thinks these risks will define the coming year in economics.
Yeah, I think risks are sort of the key theme that we highlighted when we, at the end of each year, we do this year ahead publication to try to give a roadmap to markets. But this time, I think I realized early on we couldn't provide a roadmap. All we could basically do is talk a little bit about the risks, and it will be a year to forecast early and forecast often. I think the geopolitical risks are manifold. I think just the policy discussions that we've been talking about coming out of the new administration for trade policy, for immigration policy, for fiscal policy, and maybe for regulatory policy, all of those are big unknowns that I think give lots of scope for lots of different outcomes for the U.S. economy and the global economy.
We're getting a sense of what President-elect Trump's policies might be when it comes to trade and immigration. So let's take those two in kind, and I'll ask you, from what we've heard about tariffs he might put in place, the way he might approach trade, what effects could that have on the global economy?
The way the tariffs are put into place. We've said if all the tariffs were imposed right away on day one, you could probably shave off close to 1.5% from GDP growth for the year, and probably push up inflation 0.9, so almost a full percentage point. But looking at what happened when Trump was president before, there were waves of tariffs being implemented. Listening to what the designated Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has said, maybe phase it in over time. And so if you assume that's what's going to happen, then it changes the calculus a bit. So evidence from 2018, 2017, 2018, 2019 suggests that the inflationary effect of tariffs happens fairly quickly, 2 or 3 months. The hit to growth, though, happens over a longer period of time, maybe 2 or 3 quarters. And so if we really do get that phased-in approach, then the real hit to growth probably doesn't happen until 2026.
So Justice, there could be this gulf between the rhetoric that we've heard from the president-elect and the policies that might be put in place when it comes to trade. Same seems to be true of immigration policy as well. But play that out for me. You talked a bit about the effects that might have on inflation. Certainly the Fed's focus right now is, if not squarely on, mostly on the labor market, on the jobs market. What effects could kind of a more strict draconian immigration policy have on for the U.S. economy and the global economy as well?
I don't think there's as big a gulf between rhetoric and likely policy. For immigration, I think it's another situation where there's very clear and consistent views about restraining immigration in the United States. It's very tricky. So one of the reasons why we had 3% growth in 2023, close to 3% growth in 2024, and yet inflation continuing to come down was because we had this large increase in the labor supply. You'd have a restriction in labor supply, which has got to be bad for growth. It's got to weigh on growth a bit. And at the same time, you'd have to have some reduction in demand. I mean, people coming to the country buy things. Both of those go in the same direction in terms of overall economic growth. Now, which of those would win out when it comes to inflation, I think, is a tricky question. We think the evidence is reasonably clear that the U.S. so far has been more of a supply story than a demand story. And so as a result, I would suspect we're going to have an uplift to inflation. And so this disinflationary process we've seen coming off those really highs of inflation that everyone was worried about, we've come down dramatically from there.
Another trend that we've seen recently is democracy being challenged in some major countries around the world. You think about France, South Korea, Canada. Does that affect the investability of those countries, that kind of political instability that we've seen so much as we have?
Whether it's financial assets and sort of that kind of financial investment, or if it's direct investment like capital spending and development of factories, certainty is definitely more attractive than uncertainty. And so I don't think you need to get to any sort of extreme case where democracy is threatened the way you phrase it. I think just a lack of clarity about where policy is going, a lack of ability to plan 2, 3, and 5 years down the road, I think all of that does change the investability of any given economy. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a 1-0 kind of equation, right? Often what we see is if there's more uncertainty, then investors require a bit more of a risk premium in order to invest, and so it just might mean that it's more expensive or more costly to do that investment. One of the risks we pointed to for the outlook for Europe and to some extent the UK is with the geopolitical uncertainty that's going on right there on Europe's doorstep, how much of an effect could that have on business capital formation plans that cause people to say, hey, let's just wait a minute. Too much is going on. It's hard to plan. Let's do a little bit less. And if that happens, well, then you get this reinforcing cycle. You get less investment spending, which leads to less output, leads to less employment, which then also ends up weighing on the economy. That's the real tricky part.
I'll close just by asking you about AI, and we've seen such fervor and enthusiasm for artificial intelligence and seen the progress that's been made over the last year or two. You think a lot, I imagine, just about the effects that'll have on the economy broadly, particularly when it comes to productivity. Are we closer now, as we round the corner to 2025, to having an understanding of the kind of effects, the kind of impacts that's going to have on the economy?
I think yes and no. So I think in the short run, the answer is yes, in the sense that we've seen a big boom in investment for power generation and for data centers, and we are starting to see more and more some use cases where there's actual application of AI, where it could start to help promote some productivity on the one hand, and on the other hand, in terms of the demand for investment, well, there's been a little bit of a boost to GDP because of that as well. So I think we're starting to get a little bit of a handle on what's going on, but that's the first wave. What I find interesting, and the people who are true experts on technological development and diffusion will tell you, the real gains happen, the real transformations happen when new industries, new business models are created that couldn't have been conceived of before the new innovation happened. And I think that's where we still don't have any idea exactly what's going to happen. Think back to the mid-2000s when smartphones were first created. If at the time it was super interesting, you could look on your phone, you could get the weather, you could get email on your phone. We're here in Manhattan, and what I find remarkable is you walk across any street and you'll dodge 4, 5, or 6 delivery people who have a smartphone on the handlebars of their bicycles doing
at least
deliveries.
One. Yeah.
Exactly. But those deliveries now are optimized for efficiency across one dimension or another, and it's all available in a way that no one could have conceived of when we came into 2000. So I think there are lots of use cases that aren't even conceivable yet that remain to be seen.
Coming up, what it takes to get us to change our snack food habits from the CMO of an AI-based food startup. We are creatures of habit, and especially so when it comes to our favorite snack food. So what does a new snack food company, one using AI to make our snacks healthy, do to get us to switch? That's the job of Erica Patney, Chief Marketing Officer of food startup Rivals.
It's not that the world needs another snack, but if you look at the salty snack category, let's just start there. They're actually, every offering that you see forces a compromise, whether that is calories, fat, carbs, sugar. And so there really is opportunity to deliver a no compromise salty snack like Rivals.
As the person responsible for marketing this, you have to have a target audience.
Yes.
Who's your target audience? Who are you trying to reach?
So we are targeting the health savvy doer, which, a lot of companies or brands target a mom or a kid or a college kid, but we're really targeting this mindset of someone who is into the active lifestyle. They're into trying new things. They recognize that health is a big priority. They also prioritize experiences, experiencing new things. And so that is the health savvy doer. And it spans life stages, right? So beneath that, we actually target, the Gen Z with, they're really into global flavors and spice. We're targeting a millennial mom who's not just thinking about her preferences, but also those of her household. And then we are targeting the fitness, trying to watch my macros and my micros and everything I put into my body, how is that enabling me to perform? So there's sort of those three sub-targets.
You've been involved in marketing food products for a while now. How habituated are people in their snack foods?
I think when you find something that works for your lifestyle, whether that is filling you up with satiety or convenience or a combination, I think people can be very true and loyal to snacks that check all the boxes for them. But in some categories, like for example, ice cream is a category more about like dabbling and trying new things, because it's really more about indulgence and not necessarily having so many boxes to check.
Let's talk about rivals very specifically here. I mean, at least in my experience, if there's a new product that's just as good as, I won't necessarily change over. It has to be something better than. How do you dislodge current patterns?
Yeah, I think you look at the market and you look at what's changing, right? So with rivals, we're looking at this desire for protein, which really feeds into the quest for satiety. How do you get satiety? You have protein plus fiber, right? And the consumer is getting a lot smarter about that. You look at gut health and all of the interest, and look at social media. Like the gut health trend on social media, you can't miss it. It doesn't matter who you are. And so if you're able to tap into the consumer trend of, okay, I know I need protein, everybody knows that, and wow, if I add in some fiber, I'm gonna even get more satisfied feeling. Blend that with some good flavors that are maybe unexpected or associated with more unhealthy foods or comfort foods. That's something new and different. And again, it goes back to not forcing a compromise.
Obviously, we have an obesity problem in this country, a big obesity problem. Is that changing people's behavior, or at least opening them up to the possibility of different behavior?
Yeah, we have an obesity problem, we have a diabetes problem. So those are definitely, if you just look at the numbers, those are massive. But then there's also some other trends. Snackification, we talk a lot about at Rivals in terms of consumers are moving away from 3 meals a day, and they're actually eating throughout the day more mini meals, right? So this big trend on social media and TikTok a couple years ago was girl dinner. And it was basically about like a snack as dinner. And now that's playing out into the masses. It's not just girls, it's not just on TikTok, but consumers are looking for ways to kind of eat throughout the day. And it's actually a healthier way. Previously known as grazing, I think it's just a new branding term.
One of the things that is special and different about Rivals is the role of AI, artificial intelligence, in generating this. Yes. Explain how that has fit with that satiety, the need to satiate your appetite. How do those two fit together?
So extrusion is a technology in food that's been around since the 1930s. And it's actually been kind of sleepy in terms of the technology until now. And so Rivals is the first company to apply AI to the extruder, which the extruder is actually like a barrel kind of piece of equipment.
Where the ingredients are mixed together?
Yes. Yeah, so the ingredients are mixed and then they come out in whatever shape is desired. It's a $1 trillion industry, and I think 70% of items on the grocery store shelves are extruded. So the thing about the extruder is that up until now, it's been mostly high fat, high starch that the whole industry knows how to extrude. But using AI, we've been able to figure out a way to extrude low starch, high protein, which it sounds like, oh, that must be kind of simple, but it's just never been done before in this way that can create a snack that's very nutrient dense. And so that is our novel product design.
Does it taste as good?
I think it tastes great. I mean, I'm totally hooked, and our consumer base, you know, we've doubled our repeat rate, our loyalty rate from Q2 to Q3 last year. So that tells us that the consumer is liking what they're tasting.
Might AI actually be an issue there, in the sense that, as I understand it, you can try to innovate new products faster and perhaps cheaper
than other food companies could. So the temptation is going to be, why don't we try one of those? Why don't we try one of those?
Yeah, it's definitely a temptation. And I think at Rivals, we have a very experienced team of professionals that have worked in consumer packaged goods and food, both on the technology side, marketing, and sales. And we know, like, all of us are very aware of those downfalls and those temptations. So we're doing a very good job at staying focused and, for example, staying very true to this core line of salty snacks, because we really just launched. There's a lot to do with what we have right now while we're talking about innovation and what's coming next, of course.
Geographically, where have you started? Where do you hope to go?
So we have started mostly on the West Coast. It looks like the East Coast will probably be our next region that we really try to dominate. But we're on Amazon. We are a national brand already. But in terms of where are we really focusing marketing and supporting the distribution at retail, it's West Coast and then East Coast for right now. So another trend that ties into the GLP-1 macro trend is this portion control, right? So someone who used to be able to eat a 6-ounce steak or something like that, they're now looking for a 1 or 2 ounce meal or mini meal. And we have a 1 ounce snack of Rivals that is actually 80% of our sales on Amazon compared to our 6 ounce. So this is a really interesting data point that shows us portion control, and again, it's not just the GLP-1 user, it's all of us. We want that sort of that stop, right? We want to be able to say, okay, that's enough, and not overdo it, right? So the portion control is definitely a trend that we're seeing, and consumers appreciate the convenience and also, sort of the guide rails.
That does it for us here at Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston. This is Bloomberg. See you next week for more stories of capitalism.